be screwed, feel my own adrenaline. Yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 28th part of, What If Harry Potter Meets My Little Pony? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of tkepner on fanfictionnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Later that day, the train from Canterlot must have arrived. Or maybe a Pegasus flew in, she didn't know for sure. In her current condition, she didn't care. During one of her more lucid moments, she heard the ponies gossiping in near panic about Canterlot, and that the guards had a new spell that they were to use on every pony they met. And then she saw the guards, only two, move through the park, reassuring the frightened ponies. They had done the spell so many times they almost reflexively cast it on every pony they saw. To Ellie's horror, the spell was designed to strp a ling of its camouflage. Well, at least, that's what she overheard. She was not about to volunteer to see if it worked as advertised. Fortunately, the ponies knew next to nothing about lings, and didn't know to check things other than ponies. She knew any lings they might have captured would never divulge any of the hive's secrets, or secrets in general about the lings. They would rather die. Just as she would. Fortunately, no pony ever zapped a rock with that guard spell. Other ponies? Yes. Rocks in a play park? Nope. So, she had remained hidden where she had landed. In the Ponyville play park. As a rock. Nobody ever zapped a rock with that guard spell. Other ponies? Yes. Rocks in a play park? Nope. She had already resigned herself to the likelihood that she would end up making a desperate attempt to flee to the forest. Her not yet healed broken legs would condemn her to being caught. If not by the guards, then by the wildlife in the forest. But she didn't intend to just starve to death here at the edge of a park. And that had been a fortuitous decision, that first panicked reaction, that day. Ponies came to the play park to have fun. The parents enjoyed watching their foals have fun, and the foals had fun running around and climbing on the rocks strategically placed throughout, along with the slides, swings, and other equipment. Sometimes a pony would lie against or on her, in her rock form, and she could feel the love he or she had for their foal. The first time that had happened, it had shocked her. But she had been in too much pain to really think about it. Instead, she had just accepted the love flowing out from the mother as her foal cuddled against her in the summer sun. Then, that night, she had discovered that the adolescents liked to use the cover of her rock to exchange kisses. More love. It hadn't been a lot, hiding as a rock and waiting for ponies to wander by. But the flow of love, sporadic though it might be, was sufficient for her needs. Gradually, slowly, she had healed. And she was so lonely. Being unable to feel even the tiniest flicker of emotion or thoughts from her sisters or Queen Mother after that first day was debilitating. The deaths echoing towards her from the forest told her how the rest of her sisters fared in that first week. If she hadn't been in so much pain those first few days, she probably would have had a panic attack and undone her transformation by accident. And then been caught. By the time she began to stay awake for more than a few minutes at a time, she had grown somewhat used to the loneliness. Being a rock made it a bit easier to simply exist, without too much contemplation of her situation. Rock simply endured, and so did she. She hadn't been a rock the whole time. When her reserves were sufficiently built up, which took months, she would transform late at night. Then she would sneak over to the pub and listen under the window to the gossip. Later, daringly, she would adopt the shape of a pony she had seen in Canterlot and actually go inside. She'd snatch an abandoned mug before the waitress got it, and hide in a corner seat, pretending to nurse her drink along. She didn't dare to take any of the love that drifted around her, afraid it would somehow give away her position. However, the low murmur of conversation reminded her of the hive, in a dull, limpid manner. It was a poor substitute, but it did a tiny bit to alleviate the loneliness she felt. She pretended what she was hearing were her hive mates. She rarely visited the pub after the first few times. It was too worrying, depressing, and dangerous. The winter had been the worst. Foals didn't play for very long, and ponies didn't linger after dark. When her reserve had once more began to reach the desperately low level, she forced herself to act. Staying in the park as a rock in winter was slow starvation and unacceptable. Ellie had built up a pile of dirt and snow to simulate her rock shape, then hidden in the attic of a boisterous family's home. There was love flowing there enough to survive without revealing herself. If she had been an actual infiltrator, she would have swapped places with the wife or husband for a night or two, filled up on love, then returned to the hive to offload what she had harvested. But she was a loneling with no requirements to harvest on a schedule. She could afford to harvest at a distance and simply maintain her stores. She needn't top off her reserves and then give them to the hive. Which meant she didn't have to take any risks to gain love. So, she could hide in the attic or under the floor in relative safety. At least, that was, until the ponies had decided on the day for their winter wrap-up. Then it was back to the playpark, and going back to short rations until it warmed up enough for the foals to once again flock to the park. It was an unpleasant return to worrying if she would have to take action to restore her reserves. She had been terrified hearing about and then seeing Tyrek come into town that spring. How she had managed to remain hidden mystified her. The magic allowing her to hide as rock simply vanished. She barely had time to scramble into a nearby tree before almost all of her magic disappeared. Barely enough remained to keep her alive, much less actually move. It had left her dangling between branches in her native form where the slightest breeze might have dislodged her. Or a panicked pony might have seen her. The ponies were too occupied with their own issues to notice a missing rock, fortunately for her. Then, just as she despaired that her little remaining magic was about to give out and she died, her magic mysteriously returned. She quickly transformed and hid again, in plain sight. And hoped no one had noticed anything in all the confusion. Not much later. Time moves faster when you're a rock and still in the park. News of the ponies building an enormous wall through the Everfree had gotten her attention. Several late-night visits to the pub, now always crowded with guard ponies, had been nerve-wracking, but necessary. She had copied the friends of few soldiers who had been too drunk to notice that their friends had either left or passed out, and cautious questioned them. That it was not a secret was startling. That almost no pony outside of Ponyville was paying attention, according to the guards, was just as startling. The guards all thought it was funny. Which had led her to here, waiting to go to another world where she wouldn't be hunted. If it hadn't been that she knew the hive was deserted, she might have tried to return home. Then she would have been hailed as a hero for bringing back this valuable news. Queen Mother would have rewarded her richly. Of course, if the hive had been occupied, she would have made her way there as soon as she was well enough to travel, and never found this information, made it all a moot point, anyway. That she hadn't even felt the tiniest glimmer of emotion from her Queen Mother over the link merely reinforced that she was alone. That she hadn't felt anything of even another changeling on their mental network pounded that fact home. If there had been any lings left, the Queen Mother would have made sure that every village was visited on a regular schedule to harvest for the hive, and to search for lost lings. However, she hadn't detected any such ling activity in over a year. She briefly considered that maybe Queen Mother was avoiding this area because of the Everfree, but that didn't make sense. Finally, the late hour approached and she roused from her thoughts. It was time to act. The portal awaited her. It was the hour just before the morning shift change, when the ponies on duty were most tired, and least attentive. Their reactions would be likewise delayed and slowed. It was the best time to act, her instructor had repeatedly said. She transformed into a large dog. She placed her book back into a small bag with the interior expansion spell to join her gems, and bits she had swiped it from the guard's barracks. Then she used the shrinking spell to fit it in her mouth. She had to shake her head in exasperation. Why had no Ling ever thought of those two spells? Hopefully, when she was changed by the portal, she would at least have a mouth and wouldn't lose what little she had. That would be inconvenient, at the least. It went about as she expected. She knew the drill for using the portal, having heard the ponies remind their friends. She thought about that strange name, Little Whinging, as she pushed into the tree. There was a flash of wood, then a flash of light. She quickly forced herself into the form of a large dog and rushed into one of the dressing rooms. She chose a large dog because she didn't want to be small enough to physically be caught by one of these humans. She hid behind some of the hanging robes. She heard a voice that said, "Hey! Did you see that?" "See what?" "That flash of green light by the portal and something moving." "No, and no pony is scheduled this late at night." "Not without a guard." "No, not a pony. Too small." She heard soft steps at the far end of the center hallway. She moved down the room she was in towards the other door, keeping to the cover provided by the robes hanging on the hooks. It, like the corridor, was nicely lit unfortunately. The door to the changing room opened. "The corridor's empty. See anything in the stallion's room?" "No," came the voice nearly over her head. "Nothing." "Ha, no pony in the Mara's room either. Something's not right. I know I saw something come from the portal and a green flash of light." "Well, there's no pony here." "Yeah. You're right. There's no pony here. Maybe it's a changeling." There was an extremely loud whistle from the other pony. The pony right beside her sighed. "Look, I think you're seeing things," he said as he stepped further into the room. "And if you're wrong?" There was another heartfelt sigh. She felt the robe over her head start to move. The door was still open. She burst from her cover and darted out the door. Celestia. Something just ran out of here. She was in a large room. Two guards, in human form, were at a table seated across from each other. One of them had cards in his hand. He was turned towards her as she charged across the room at full speed towards the exit. "It's a big dog." The one seated closest to her turned and leapt at her. His chair scraped and slid across the floor. She concentrated as hard as she could on the door handle. A green glow enveloped it. The guard crashed to the ground behind her. To her surprise, not only did the handle turn, the door opened towards her. One of the humans was coming in. "Who sounded the alarm?" the person coming in said. Not stopping to worry about it, Ellie rammed into the side of the human's legs and kept running. "Ah!" cried her victim as she fell to the floor. "What's a dog doing here?" "An dog came through the portal." "No. A changeling. It used magic." The room behind her fell into bedlam as the guards tried to follow her. She immediately left the wooden walkway and charged into the underbrush. It didn't matter which way she went, as long as she put enough space between her and the guards to lose them. She leapt over a large, downed, tree trunk, leaving a startled Celestia in her wake. "I can't see where it went." "It's too dark," she heard from far behind her. A moment later, the unicorns were casting light spells. Incredibly, her pursuit fell off quickly. She had expected there to be Pegasi on this side, not to mention earth ponies. There certainly were on the other side. She didn't stop running until she reached the stone wall she had heard surrounded the entire estate. Adding wings to her dog was easy, and she flew over the wall. She had lucked out in choosing her direction to run. There was only farmland out here. She kept running for a few minutes, then changed to a squirrel and climbed the nearest tree. She transformed back into a changeling, spit the bag out of her mouth and stuck it to her chitin. Then she started flying. When she started to see lights through the trees, she turned left. Half an hour later, she was burrowing her way underground as a large mouse, dragging her bag after her once she had the hole deep enough. She was far, far away from the portal. She had made it. Tomorrow, she would start exploring this new world. While she waited for the next night, she slept, tired from her frantic escape. She was really out of shape due to hiding for so long without any exercise to mention. On the other hoof, she had sufficient reserves to last a week if she were careful and frugal in her use of magic. The less said about Sunday, the better, Harry felt. For the first time, the girls did not climb out of his trunk to wake him. The entire Gryffindor first-year cohort had difficulty meeting each other's eyes, especially the boys while they were dressing. The teasing in the common room from the upper years was bad enough, but breakfast was barely bearable as the entire rest of the school laughed at what had happened. There were many falsetto voices calling out, "Oh, Harry! I love you, please come back," and then cracking up into laughter. The only thing that made it bearable was that 90% of the teasing was directed at the Slytherin and Gryffindor first-year boys and not him. Myrtle had been especially merciless to the Slytherins, when she wasn't flirting with one of the prefects. Immediately after breakfast, the 5 girls commandeered an empty classroom and dragged Harry inside. As soon as they got inside, and locked the door which made him a bit nervous at first, they transformed into ponies. Harry copied them. "We have to talk," Hermione had said in her no-nonsense tone. What happened yesterday was unforgivable, even if it was a love potion that caused it all. Sweetie Belle interrupted. "I'm so sorry, Harry," she had said, sobbing, "please don't hate me." "I don't hate you," Harry had quickly replied. He looked around at the others. "I don't hate any of you. I know it's not your fault, it's just, well, embarrassing." He looked down at the floor, and a bit scary, too. "You should have seen the way you were looking at me." Apple Bloom, Scootaloo, Ginny, and Hermione stood at a respectful distance. They didn't want to crowd him and blushed madly. Sweetie Belle stood to one side of them, still crying. "Still, Harry," Hermione said, "the way we acted was well, not how we wanted to act at that moment." She stopped and took a calming breath. "I like you, we all like you. A lot. You're a really good friend, Harry, and you've taught us such neat spells. We don't want that to change." She twisted her hands together, then said. "And we want to apologize for chasing you just like all the others did." She took a deep breath. "I'm sorry we put you on the spot like that. I'm sorry we chased you like cat chasing a mouse, not that you're a mouse," she hastily added. "Just that, well, we shouldn't have done that, and I'm sorry, we're all very, very sorry." Ginny mumbled her agreement and an apology. Apple Bloom said, with a hesitant smile as Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle nodded, "Hey, we're the Cutie Mark Crusaders, and you're our herdmate. You know we'll always protect you and never would we make you do anything you didn't want to do. We're your friends above all else." He had felt their sincerity. "And we're really sorry we chased you like that." They all stood there awkwardly, looking at the floor between swift glances at Harry. He stared back at them, unsure of what he should say. Finally, Scootaloo said, shaking her head, "Wow, Harry, I never realized just how fast and nimble you are. How come you never ran that fast in the Everfree? You would easily have outpaced us and we wouldn't have worried so much." "Well, I couldn't just leave you all behind in the Everfree, now, could I?" he answered awkwardly, nervously rubbing his left front hoof on his right front leg. They all apologized again, and Hermione and Ginny insisted that they considered him just a good friend, but he had the feeling that maybe they weren't being as truthful about the situation as they pretended. That they were downplaying how they felt. Ginny, he knew from what Ron had told him, had long fantasized at marrying him when she got older. Her crush on him during the weeks before they got to Hogwarts had been kinda impossible to ignore. The group hug afterwards was awkward, at first, but then became more comfortable and settled into a pony pile as they discussed what had happened. Gradually, by the time lunch came around, Harry was laughing at their renditions of the various boys, and some of the girls, caught up in the potion spell. He did refuse to tell them where he had hidden, on the grounds he might need a hiding place in the future if he got them mad at him. He did tell them about his teleporting successfully. Then made them pinky promise not to tell anyone who didn't already know it, made for an ace secret. He did say he would tell Twilight the next time he saw her. Lunch was awkward, with most of the school still ragging on the topic of Sweetie Belle's love potion number 9. The Gryffindors weren't sure where that name came from and its effects on various students. But the girls closed ranks around Harry, which brought on its own teasing comments about Harry's HRM from the rest of the Gryffindors. There were a few comments wondering if he would entertain adding a few Slytherins to the pack, comments which were not approved of by the girls. However, Harry wasn't sure that a few of the Slytherin's girls weren't actually being serious under the guise of humor. Myrtle, though, did come over to them. "Hey," she said, leaning one hand on the table and giving the whole cohort a long look. "Are you all okay?" She frowned. "I know you all got accidentally dosed with a love potion." Sweetie Belle blushed and ducked her head down, refusing to meet her eyes. "I've seen a lot of things happen while I was a ghost, you know," Myrtle continued. "If any of you want to talk about it, I'd be happy to listen." Her gaze lingered on one student. "Harry, if you want someone uninvolved to talk to, all you have to do is ask. I can give you a girl's perspective that your friends might be too bashful or afraid to share." Harry looked up at her, still blushing about the topic, and thought for a moment. "Not right now," he said slowly. "Maybe later." He looked at his friends. In fact, when Harry reflected on it, Myrtle seemed much calmer today than she had been in the previous few days. She almost seemed to glow. Her pimples were gone, he noticed, so she must have finally taken that acne cure the MDM Pomfrey had mentioned. The lack of pimples really did improve both her looks and her outlook. However, she must have tripped over something and fallen last night or this morning as she was walking a bit stiffly. When he later asked about it, she had simply laughed. "Oh, nothing of the sort. I'm sure your girlfriends will be happy to explain it," she had said, smirking at the girls nearby. All of whom, when he looked, were blushing. She laughed again. He decided that was one question he could postpone asking. Most of the witches seemed to notice Myrtle's change in attitude. She was no longer shooting fiery looks at every wizard in sight, but were split on whether this was a good thing or not. The ones with boyfriends kept casting worried glances at their chosen ones, and asking if they had really gone to bed the night before. Some of the looks the first-year girls were giving Harry, though, still made him uncomfortable. Myrtle smiled down at him, then reached over and ruffled his hair. Not that you could tell she had done anything, considering how difficult his hair was to manage, anyway. "Just say the word," she said, then smiled at the group. "You all did me a wonderful favor, it's only right I pay you back, so, any questions? Come to me. Okay." They nodded and mumbled agreements as she turned and sauntered away. Oliver sat beside the first years at lunch. He had been making a point of sitting with them since the beginning of the year, as did the twins and the 3 chasers. After Myrtle left, he introduced the new chaser, Katie Bell, a brown-haired, brown-eyed second year of average appearance. Then he said, "Quidditch tryouts are scheduled for this afternoon and I would greatly appreciate it if you 7 would do so." He stared significantly at the fillies, Hermione, and Ginny. "You all played wonderfully at the Weasleys and I think you all would be a wonderful asset to the team." After a bit more groveling and pleading from the Quidditch captain, the Gryffindor first years found themselves being escorted by the Quidditch team to the pitch outside. Hermione, while happy to go along, absolutely refused to participate. "I am not nearly suicidal enough to actually play the game in a real team," she said, firmly. The other Gryffindors came with just to watch and cheer their friends. Once they were on the pitch, Oliver introduced everyone on the team to the Gryffindors. The only new face on the team was Katie Bell, a new chaser. Since the only position that needed filling was the seeker, Oliver pulled out a bag of golf ball, to Harry's surprise. Seeing the puzzled looks on their faces, Oliver hefted the bag and explained, "The only position that needs filling at the tryouts today is the seeker." What followed was a series of hard-diving catches. Oliver would launch a golf ball out with his wand, Two prospective seekers would race each other to catch it. He launched them at different speeds, directions, and angles. Then he did a round-robin match where each of the 5 prospective seekers raced against each other. The highest 3 scorers repeated the tests. The final ranking was Scootaloo, Harry, Ginny, Apple Bloom and Sweetie Belle, while good, just couldn't quite match the 2 Pegasi. And Harry just seemed to be a prodigy. "You all did just great," Oliver said. "I've seen you all play at the Weasleys, so I know you're all pretty good at spotting the snitch itself, so we can dispense with that part of the drill." He had grinned at Scootaloo, and said, "You'll be the best seeker we've ever had." Scootaloo looked down at the ground for a moment, then sheepishly said, "I'm really not that interested in playing Quidditch on a broom, it's far more fun as a Pegasus." Oliver looked as if he about to cry, but then he closed his eyes for a moment and sighed heavily. "Yeah," he said, "I can understand that completely." He turned to the others, and frowned slightly. Harry and Ginny had been neck and neck for most of the trials, but Harry just seemed to have a better instinctive control of this broom that Ginny couldn't quite match. Oliver finally said, "Okay, Harry, you'll be our seeker, Ginny will be the substitute seeker in case Harry gets laid up." He looked over at the others. "Scootaloo, Apple Bloom and Sweetie Belle, would you mind being substitutes for chasers? And Ron, substitute keeper. All 4 of you are far better than any of the older Griffies, and no one else was interested in those positions, anyway." Ron had been ecstatic at being on the team, even if it was as a keeper substitute. He immediately started peppering Oliver with questions, and the 2 of them became quickly engrossed in the details of proper defending. With their Quidditch positions settled, and Oliver happy, Harry and the girls headed for the lake. They wanted to join the other students taking advantage of the trebuchet. The rest of the cohort, still embarrassed over yesterday's incident, trailed far after them or found something else to do. Harry and the 5 girls carved their names, and the names of the rest of the Gryffindor cohort who had helped build the trebuchet, into the framed side pieces while they waited their turns. The giant squid that lived in the lake had started to get involved, fishing the students out of the water and tossing them closer to shore. Then it started trying to catch the Pegasi as they flew low over the water at high speeds. At dinner, there was a professor seated at the head table whom Harry had never before seen. Partway through the meal, though, Headmaster Dumbledore stood and tapped his crystal goblet. The ringing tones soon quieted the hall. "I hope you all have had a relaxing and joyful day, a wonderful day after such an event-filled week." He swept his gaze across the hall, smiling with his eyes twinkling happily. "This evening it is my pleasure to introduce your new history of magic professor." The students in the hall groaned or sighed at the thought of returning to that boring class. The headmaster looked over to the unfamiliar wizard, who stood and smiled, waving. "Remus Lupin, Hogwarts class of 1978. He started clapping, with the rest of the hall joining in unenthusiastically. Now they had to start going to that class and they couldn't sleep late, study, or nap in it anymore. Harry noticed, however, that Professor Snape did not seem nearly as enthused about the new professor's presence as the other professors. He sat with his arms folded over his chest, and glared at the wizard, his expression completely blank. Harry wondered if they had attended Hogwarts together at some point, and hadn't gotten along very well. Still, even if they had been hated enemies, for Professor Snape to deny Professor Lupin the normal professional courtesy for his introduction to the school seemed very petty and childish. Then again, Professor Snape's actions towards the Gryffindors in general, and Harry in particular, didn't seem very mature at all. Things between Harry, Dean, Seamus, Ron, and Neville were awkward, until later that evening, after curfew. It started with Dean making fun of Ron, then Ron threw a pillow. By the time they were done, pillows and feathers were everywhere. And they were back to the way things had been the day before yesterday, to Harry's vast relief. John Major once more walked into the meeting room at number 10 shortly after the dinner hour. He stopped for a moment at seeing a purple alicorn standing on the conference table, then he bowed his head slightly. "Princess Sparkle," he said. He continued on to his chair. She blushed. "Sorry, Just checking to see if there was any magic in use, she said, turning to face him. As far as I can tell, this building seems okay, except for a grouping down that way. She pointed down and to one side with a forehoof. He smiled. That should be the storage room where we put all of the paintings and photographs after our last meeting. She grinned at him, then jumped to the floor before returning to her human form. Excellent. I'll have 10 unicorns ready on Monday to help you check those things. They will be waiting in Little Whinging at 8 o'clock. We'll leave it to your experts as to their schedules and where they go first. She nodded to Foreign Secretary Hurd and Home Secretary Baker, as well as Sir McCall and Sir Walker seated on either side of the table. Castor was seated beside Sir Walker. Based on the ones we've experimented with, we can now detect them easily. The spell makes the frames glow, so you can easily separate them out from the stacks. And the ones that can't be moved, such as the one in your office, just be careful of what you say. Her grin faded and she became more serious. She shuffled awkwardly on her feet, her hands behind her back, looking for all the world like a little girl caught stealing from the cookie jar. I'm sorry to have interrupted your day for this. It's kind of important. She stopped and fidgeted for a moment. I have unfortunate news for you. I'm, really sorry, but, early this morning, well before sunrise, one of our enemies managed to sneak through the portal into your world. She blushed heavily. The men all stiffened. She swallowed. This creature is not a pony. It's what we call a changeling. Castor had a very bad feeling about this. Twilight pulled out a wand, which was a surprise, and tapped the table. A three-dimensional image of a creature appeared. It looked like a cross between a pony and a bug. The image slowly rotated. This, is a changeling. She glanced at them hesitantly. A characteristic of all changelings, in their normal form, are the holes you see in its legs, horn, wings, and tail. Their color seems to be a uniform black or very dark blue. Notice the fangs, they can inject a paralyzing/sleep-inducing venom. How long it lasts depends on how much they use. It is not fatal and every victim recovers with no ill effects. Her tone took on a lecturing quality and she became more confident. You'll notice that it has both a horn and wings. Fortunately, the magic cast by the changelings isn't nearly as powerful as that from a unicorn, neither can it fly as far or fast as Pegasus, and they aren't as strong as an earth pony. They can lift heavier objects, compared to Pegasi. As she paused, Castor asked, how did something like that get past the guards without being seen? He looked at the other men. I've seen your setup over there and it looks pretty airtight. He looked back at her. I can't imagine this thing just walked in. She grimaced, sighed, looked down, and blushed, again. And that's the problem, it did. The Prime Minister raised his eyebrows and the other 5 men just stared at her. She ducked her head down a little. We call them changelings because that's what they do. They can imitate any pony they see or know. Fortunately, they can't duplicate our strengths or our talents. What? Came Castor's quick, and puzzled, response. She shook her head and sighed. They are the, ultimate imitator. They can change their appearance to make themselves look just like me, for example. If one stood beside me, you wouldn't be able to tell us apart, not even if it spoke to you. If it claimed to be me, there's no way you could detect the deception. I saw them do it when they tried to invade Canterlot last year. She shivered. It's really creepy to run around a corner and see 7 of you staring back at you, as well as 7 of each of your friends. She looked them all in the eyes before adding, or not knowing if your best friend coming around the other corner is your friend or a changeling. The men exchanged worried looks. Can they imitate us? Came the Prime Minister's worried question. Twilight took a deep breath and blew it out her mouth. Reluctantly, she said, if you had asked me yesterday, I would have said they could only copy ponies. This morning, she tapped her wand on the table again and large dog appeared in mid-run, a slightly open door not far in front of it. The dog, while not having any really distinguishing physical features, had a blue coat with orange markings. This was found in the men's changing room after a guard thought he saw a flash of green light from the portal hallway. As you can see, it is much smaller than the changeling beside it on the table here. Her confident tone was back. However, there is no doubt that it is a changeling. Notice the glow around doorknob. That particular shade of green is a signature green of the changelings. Almost all of them cast in that color. And none of the unicorns in the room were casting at that moment. She swallowed. I checked with the guards on the other side of the portal. They saw no such animal anywhere near the portal. She sighed. We took apart the wooden walkway and found clear, fresh signs of a small animal, about a quarter the size of this dog, had crawled under it the entire way from where the walkway starts to the tree. It must have taken days for it to move, a little bit at a time, without being heard or seen. And the open space under the walkway that actually fronts to portal? It is smaller still. She waved her hand at the image, again. Plus, studying the area carefully, there is no way a dog of any size could have made its way from Sweet Apple Acres to the portal walkway without being seen and captured. The only conclusion is that changelings can imitate animals, even animals that are smaller than they are, and likely animals that are bigger. The portal area is spelled against flying animals, so the changeling could not have simply flown over the wall or followed the path from Sweet Apple Acres. She hesitated. Unless it became a bee, I suppose. They do live in a hive with a queen, and the workers are all female. She sighed. We didn't want to screen out the bugs that help flowers and other plants. I suppose we'll have to do that now. The earth ponies won't like all the extra work. She worried her lower lip between her teeth. But if it could do that, why chose a dog form to escape on this side of the portal? She shook her head. So, I don't know. Maybe. A day ago, I would have said no, but after this morning? I don't know. She sighed and looked at the two images still on the tabletop, clearly depressed that this had happened. You have to understand, Twilight said, almost pleading, we didn't even know these things existed, except as vague mythological rumors, until they attacked us last year. What little we know is from the few we captured after blasting them out of Canterlot and destroying their army. Thousands of them died, hundreds escaped, and we only managed to capture a handful. And, as you can imagine, they haven't exactly been helpful. Unfortunately, our prisoners have all died because we couldn't give them the food they needed. What do they eat? Asked Sir Walker in a stunned tone. Love. After several seconds of dead silence, the Prime Minister said, You're not joking, are you? She shook her head slowly. No. They are emotivores. They literally eat emotions, specifically love. She waved a hand in the air. Oh, they can eat other things too, like vegetables, fruits, and meats, but their life force and magic are powered by emotions. She gave them a wan smile. Regrettably, those other foods don't really provide the changelings with much nourishment. It seems they eat food, as we do, sporadically. They only eat it regularly to blend in with ponies when they're gathering love for their hive. She paused, then added, except water. Water they need just like any other creature. The Prime Minister shook his head, closed his eyes for a moment. So, these changelings are like bees. Only instead of collecting nectar from flowers, they collect love from ponies? And take it back to their hive to share with the others? She nodded happily. Yes, exactly. They are quite similar, right down to all the workers apparently being females. But with their ability to duplicate other animals, of both sexes, it's sort of a moot point. And you couldn't provide them with love? He asked, arching his eyebrows. She blushed. Well, the problem is more properly that we could not love them. And we didn't trust any of them to not try to take control of any ponies who went into their cells. Wait, said Sir Walker, what do you mean control? Twilight pointed at the fangs in the mouth of the changeling. These exude a venom that makes the victim willing to do whatever they are asked to do. It's easy to detect, the victims are glassy-eyed when first bitten. And while it is active, the victims are very suggestible. It makes it easier to draw love from the pony that has been bitten. She shifted on her feet. You can't be sure the victim won't come back in several hours and hit your guard over the head with a club and let their changeling escape. She gave a small shudder. And while they can feed from a short distance, no contact needed. Convincing two ponies to connect in a dank, dark cell in the dungeons isn't a simple task. Not to mention that after we fought off their invasion, most ponies hate and fear the changelings. So, trying to generate feelings of love while knowing a terrifying monster is on the other side of the wall from you is a bit of a problem. She sighed deeply, hence, our current lack of prisoners. Then she frowned. We're already redoing our spells to prevent anything bigger than a worm from moving over or under the walls or through the gates. Unfortunately, we don't know that the changelings can't make themselves that small, too. We also will be tearing down and rebuilding the building around the portal tree on this side to make it impossible for anything to sneak through like this again. And adding an airtight building around the base of the tree in Equestria. It will be a good deal more inconvenient to use the portal, but I believe the trade-off will be worth it. One thing we have managed to do, though, is to come up with runes that are effective at detecting changelings. She opened her briefcase and stuck her arm in it. She withdrew several bundles of papers. Here are some photographs for you, and the runes with their explanations. You have to paint the runes at each corner of a door or window frame, or stamp them in metal at each corner. If a changeling comes through, he's forced back into his normal form. She sighed as she looked at the doorframe to the conference room. If you're building a building, you can put the runes inside the doorframe or window frame where they can't be seen. Or damaged so that they no longer work. If you remove the casings from the doorframes of completed buildings, you should be able to insert slips of metal with the runes on them between the frames and the wall, keeping them hidden. This is what we are doing to every door, window, air vent, or other opening through the walls and roofs of the portal buildings. This will not happen a second time, Twilight promised fervently. Although, I'll understand if you wish to cease talking with us about an embassy, she added dismally, somehow managing to convey the attitude of a kicked puppy. And ask us to maintain only minimal contact. She sighed sadly. She handed the papers to Castor, who was closest to her. He took one bundle and handed the rest to Sir Walker, who passed them on after taking one for himself. They studied the papers for several minutes as Twilight nervously rocked from side to side and looked around the room. Sir McCall looked over at Twilight. Can you add runes to stun the changeling as it comes through the door? He asked. That would make it much easier to apprehend this creature if it should be discovered. It would also make it possible to catch one should it try to sneak in when no one was watching, such as late at night. Twilight pursed her lips and frowned. It should be possible, but then I think I would have to put in a storage crystal for the magic to power the stunner. She stood silent for a moment, then grabbed a paper and pencil from her briefcase. She stared at the paper as the pencil flew across it scribbling things, and then xng some out while underlining others. She filled one page, then another. The men continued studying the papers she had given them and quietly discussing things. After several minutes, she pushed a final paper over to Sir Walker. That should do the job, she said. The stun will last at least 20 seconds, but not more than 50. For anything longer, I need a magic gem in the setting. Then it could last for several hours. She pressed her lips together tightly, then said, because this is our fault, I will put a priority on making metal strips with the gems embedded in them. She paused. I'll bring over a few hundred tomorrow to get you started. Then we'll bring you several thousand a week. If you want to make them yourselves, I can arrange to have the gems delivered by the ton. The men exchanged thoughtful glances. Any decent stamping mill could make 1 million of these, the Home Secretary said, waving the paper Twilight had given him, in a couple of days. The Prime Minister nodded in agreement. You can, she said, clearly surprised at the number and time frame. The director nodded, sure, he said nonchalantly, finally happy to show them something the humans were much better at, just give us a sample and the gems, and we're good to go. She blinked, then said, in any case, we'll mount a few dozen on both sides of the portal so this won't happen in the future. And I'll have Princess Celestia ship us 1,000,000 gems of the right size. She frowned. It might take a week to gather and size them correctly. She looked at them hopefully. Will that be sufficient? And I'll still drop off 300 tomorrow to get you started, with another few thousand by the time the royal gems arrive. After a few moments' silence, the Home Secretary asked, do you think this changeling is a realistic threat? It is only one. Twilight sighed. I don't know. Was it sent by its Queen Chrysalis? Is it alone, or was it merely the first of more that the Queen is intending to send through? She shook her head. I know that the Queen doesn't know anything about portals or she would have exploited them long ago. Could she create a portal now that she knows about them? Probably not. Could she use the lone worker as an anchor for a portal? I know I could, but I don't think she can. Or, was the worker alone? Had it heard rumors of a new world and decided it had a better chance of surviving here, so it decided to go through the portal? She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. All the surviving workers we managed to trace, we still haven't been able to catch. Any fled Equestria many months ago. We haven't seen any since then. She paused to think, however, if they can imitate common animals then they could have been standing right beside our guards and we wouldn't have known it. She sighed ruefully. I suspect that this worker might have been hiding in the ever-free forest. It saw an opportunity to go somewhere where it wasn't being hunted. Somewhere where no one knew of its existence, and therefore it would be safe. She looked out the window for a moment. Whether it can feed off the love of non-magical beings such as yourselves is unknown. It might be that you'll read in the newspapers about some weird bug-like pony found dead in a forest or an abandoned building. She looked back at them, or it might survive just fine. From what we did find out, the workers collect love food for their hive. They don't deviate from that unless it's at the order of their queen. A lone worker, without a hive, is unlikely to want to call attention to itself. It would have no home to retreat to if it was found out. So, it will only feed itself when necessary, and then only sparingly. So, realistically, I would say probably not. You don't truly need to worry. But it is better safe than sorry. For all we know, it could be Queen Chrysalis. She quickly added, that's highly doubtful, as I can't see Queen Chrysalis abandoning her surviving hive members. At the very least, if she could sneak in that close, she would have taken as many workers with her as possible. Or maybe it's an immature queen from the hive. But I doubt that. I can't see Queen Chrysalis allowing an immature queen in her hive, especially one who might supplant her. So, no. I don't think this changeling is a real threat to you. Now, the witches and wizards might have a problem, because it should be able to feed love off of them without a problem. She shook her head. Unfortunately, we simply do not know. She stopped and thought a moment. On the bright side, we checked all the personnel at the portal and none of them are changelings and none of them have any memory gaps to indicate that they were temporarily replaced. We also haven't had any pets or other animals wander into the portal area. Which means we haven't any other issues with infiltration. She scanned their expressions. I believe this is a situation of better safe than sorry. How do you know these runes will work? Asked the Sir McCall. She smiled wanly. A guard accidentally left a cell door only partially locked, and several changelings attempted to escape. As soon as they left the cell, they took the appearances of other guards to try to gain themselves a few seconds of confusion when they were spotted. The runes had been carved onto the walls, floor, and ceiling of a passage, one that led to the way out of the dungeons. It was far out of their sight in the cell. The runes worked perfectly. The politicians were silent, considering what they had been told. Both the Home and Foreign Secretaries were regarding the princess with a bit of hostility while the Prime Minister maintained a blank expression. How will we know if this changeling has started harvesting love from any of our people? Asked the Prime Minister. She pursed her lips. Look for reports of people apparently being in two places at once, she said slowly. Or people being unable to remember doing things with their spouses. Flirting, when they are known to not be flirts. Oh, sure, like that's unusual behavior, said Castor somewhat sarcastically. He shook his head. She shrugged helplessly. I'm sorry, I can't help more. As I said, we never even suspected that these creatures were in our land until they attacked us. She sighed despondently. They also kidnap victims and keep them in pods for easy harvesting of love. When you're in a pod, you dream very pleasant dreams and generate the love they need. However, as I said, I don't know if your people can supply what they need. She paused, taking in their expressions. I'm really, really sorry this happened. Celestia and Luna are simply furious. Twilight shivered and ran her hands up the sides of her upper arms. If you need any help in fighting these creatures, we'll do anything we can to help you. The meeting went on until midnight. Blueblood's ambassadorial staff would soon be getting much bigger. The date of the portals, and the ponies, unveiling would be moved up. Monday, the headmaster had just settled down to his morning breakfast when his fluff flamed green and a head appeared, followed by Princess Sparkle's voice. Are you there, Headmaster Dumbledore? May we come through? Of course, Princess Sparkle. You are always welcome here. The Atlanteans are early, Albus thought, but that shall allow us that much more time to get to know one another. Twilight stepped through and was followed by 5 others. The new people were all clumsy in their use of the flu, stumbling and tripping as they came into his office. Fortunately, none of them fell. It gave him more than enough time to examine the 5 as they recovered. A white-haired man with blue eyes, a black-haired man with purple eyes, a brown-haired woman with blue eyes, a purple-haired woman with reddish-orange eyes, and a man with red hair that had an orange streak and blue-green eyes. Once they had all recovered, the princess began to introduce them. These are Professors Bill Ney, Swan Song, High Range, Booster, and Sunburst. As he stood at their introductions and shook their hands, how odd that they all shook hands. Unlike the others he had met, he noticed that, for the first time, the men outnumbered the women. And the last man, Sunburst, was wearing a rather fetching, long, dark blue coat with a blue-green trim and the same color 5-point stars scattered on it. The other 2 women and 2 men wore traditional and rather nondescript robes. Welcome to Hogwarts, he said jovially. We have rooms for you set aside. Have you had breakfast yet? The 5 had already scattered around his office and had begun examining the various books, trinkets, and portraits. One, he thought it was Swan Song, stared intently at a blank spot on the wall. The portraits, at least those who were awake, stared back in some consternation. The remaining portraits were waking up, and it wasn't long before they all were paying attention. We have already dined, Princess Sparkle said. But thank you for the invitation. We don't want to intrude, so please, finish your breakfast. She turned and stared at the others. I'm sure they can amuse themselves for a few minutes. She turned back to him and took a deep breath. Unfortunately, I do have some bad news for you. He sat back down as she seated herself on one of his chairs. He took a sip of tea and then a bite of his jammed toast. He raised an eyebrow and tilted his head in invitation for her to explain. She sighed and looked away for a moment, then turned back to him. I'm sorry to say that one of our enemies has managed to sneak past our protections and is now in your world, she said apologetically, sincerity evident in both her tone and body language. He raised the other eyebrow and took another bite. She grimaced. A creature we call a changeling has snuck into England. At his startled look, she rushed to add, not a changeling as your legends describe. Not a member of the Fae. He leaned back, more than a little relieved, and took another sip of his tea. The legends of the Fae were native to Ireland, and many scholars believe that they had been 2 warring tribes of wizards and witches that had been wiped out, or at least driven underground, no pun intended, by the advance of the Romans 2,000 years ago. Or, that they were 2 factions of a magical race at war with itself. Today, at least, there were no traces of the ones formerly known as Fae. Except for alarming stories that still circulated regarding the Seelie and Unseelie courts. She described the events of the previous day. And the changeling that had managed to sneak past their defenses. The others had already been briefed, he saw from their disinterested looks at the displays she placed on his table. It lives off of love, you say, he said, musing. He sat back in his chair, breakfast forgotten. Like dementors, which feed off of love and happiness, and leave only fear and despair in their wake. She tilted her head, thinking. No, not like dementors. The changelings can feed passively without harming anyone, or the victim, even noticing it has been done. Although, the changelings can force the feeding and drain their victim. Doing so leaves behind someone who can no longer feel emotions. Their victims' souls are left intact, unlike the dementors. The changelings can reason as well as you or I, plus, dementors cannot change their shape. Nor do they share, as the changelings do, what they get with their fellow dementors. At least, I don't think dementors do that. The books don't say. She frowned unhappily. The changeling's favorite tactic, apparently, is taking the form of another and fooling that other's partner into loving them, giving them sustenance. They can only keep the charade up for a night, or maybe a day. The longer they stay with someone, the more liable they are to make a mistake and be caught. So, they do not harm their prey. The one they substitute for rarely notices the lost time unless it is remarked upon by their friends. The victim usually thinks they fell asleep, or has only a fuzzy memory of the day as being like any other. And the spouse or friend doesn't suspect a thing. Which means they can return many times to the same victim and never get caught. Princess Sparkle sighed and shook her head dejectedly. The changelings are very good at imitating others. If one of them were to copy me, you would never detect the deception visually or by the way I sound. Like someone using polyjuice. She paused a moment, then said, yes, just like polyjuice, except there is nothing to drink, nor any time limit. The only giveaway is if they make a mistake in the personality or knowledge of the one they are imitating. She worried her lip, clearly remembering something unpleasant. They can also put people in pods. The pods make the victims easily manageable and a reliable food source. And, I have to say, safe from physical injuries. She shivered. She told him an abbreviated version of what had happened in Canterlot, and what the ponies had learned. Fortunately, we have developed runes, and a spell, to detect them. She retrieved a paper from her briefcase and laid it on his desk. These will force a changeling back to its form, and stun it for a short time so you can apprehend it. She gave him a grim smile. That is one of the new spells we will be placing into the protective charms on Hogwarts. She glanced at her associates and frowned. If I can keep them on track, she half mumbled. He sat back and considered what she had said. The changelings were dangerous, no doubt, but they didn't seem to be any more dangerous than any of the other creatures in the wizarding world such as the boggarts or doxies. In fact, they were fairly benign, considering her description of them. It was their attack on the Atlantean capital of Canterlot an allusion to Camelot. That was worrying. If they could hide so well, why had they blatantly attacked? They could have infiltrated over several weeks and then taken control with ease and still maintained their cover. Instead, they had attacked in a wave of soldiers, intent on simply overwhelming their enemy. It made no sense unless their queen had gone mad. He sighed softly. He considered what he should tell the ministry. Based on Princess Sparkle's account of the creatures and their abilities, he didn't think that a single changeling was all that much of a threat. Perhaps a word with his old friend Alastor about a new menace, and the runes to catch it, were in order. And a warning to Amelia. A few words to certain people. Yes, something simple. No need to involve the ministry, officially. And the panic that would inevitably ensue. Then he considered that Alastor would immediately want to establish the runes everywhere, especially at all of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement offices and the holding cells. And he would make the spell to force a changeling to its native form a must for all the Aurors, with instructions to cast it at anyone the Auror suspected might not be whom they said they were. Which would draw immediate attention to the ministry and himself. And then the attention would focus on Albus. When word began to circulate that there was only one changeling, all three of them, the ministry, Alastair, and himself would come into severe criticism. He couldn't afford that right now. While the publicity that Rita had focused on Hogwarts was good publicity in that it wasn't critical, he didn't want to take a chance that this would detrimentally affect the school. Especially as the Atlanteans would get dragged into the spotlight. That meant Harry would get dragged in as well. Which would create friction between them. Albus could always blame Moody's paranoia when it came to light that he was the source of the information, but that was a weak argument. He would have to consider carefully just who he revealed this to and how. Too bad the Death Eaters were not so simply exposed. Although the Imperius defense runes from the other day were certainly a good step forward. Well, he really should show the newcomers their new apartments and let them get to work. At lunch he would inform everyone that they had arrived. He would have to give more thought to the differences between Dementors and Changelings. Not to mention pondering why the Atlanteans had a portal instead of using a portkey, flow, or operating from Equestria to England. To better hide themselves, maybe? Or were there protections against those that only left a portal as a transportation method? Harry was pleasantly surprised when Monday, at breakfast, Oliver told him, Quidditch practice is 3 times a week, after classes, and before dinner. Today is the first day, then Wednesday, and then Friday. Saturday or Sunday aren't usually practice days unless it's the week before a match, then we practice those days as well. The others practice as well. We have to schedule our practices around each other, and sometimes we can't use the pitch. Got that? Harry nodded and said, yeah, I got it. Then Oliver left for his first class as they finished their breakfast and then headed for their first class of the week. History of Magic, their first since the Ghost, Bins, had left 2 weeks ago, was very interesting, Harry thought. The professor's appearance, alone, captured their attention. The wizard, now that they were closer and in better lighting, wore an extremely shabby set of robes that had been darned in several places. He had several scars on his face and hands and looked a bit world-weary. Though quite young, his light brown hair was flecked with grey. I know you haven't covered this, he said, it's not a goblin revolt. That had garnered a laugh from the students. In fact, in the entire time that I was a student, it was only mentioned once, in 6th year. That isn't enough. He paused to let that sink in. Get your quills ready, he said warningly. The single most important organization for wizards is the Wizengamot, he began. The lecture started off with a brief summary of the political climate and then segued into the actual makeup of the Wizengamot. The Wizengamot, it seemed, usually had 50 members, mostly from old wizarding families that were members in good standing. Harry found it mildly amusing that, for all of Draco's posturing, Draco Malfoy's father was not a member of that body, while both the Potters and the Longbottoms were. The Potter's family seat was being held in abeyance until he was of age, 17 in the wizarding world. In fact, several families were, reducing actual membership to 40, at this time. The process for selecting members was limited to the membership no general elections and they currently limited the selection only to established British families of good standing. There would be no Muggleborn or half-bloods added to the seating. However, the Minister for Magic had some power over the final selection. Aside from the Wizengamot members and the head warlock, there was a court scribe to record the in-session proceedings. The Minister for Magic, senior undersecretary to the Minister, and head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement could attend trials and hearings, if they so chose. A British youth representative, limited to under 17 years old, was also usually present. This was considered a prize position for 6th and 7th years, who fiercely vied for the political position each time the Wizengamot met. Those who might inherit a family seat were given priority. Again, half-bloods and Muggleborn need not apply. The only caveat to that was if none of the purebloods were interested, then half-bloods would be allowed to attend. Professor Lupin then ran down the different departments and who their current heads were, with the warning that the information would be on a test later. And the promise of a more detailed explanation in subsequent lectures. Hermione was thrilled at the information while Harry and the Fillies thought it interesting, but somewhat dull. Fortunately, the names and departments they headed were simple lists he handed out. For homework, they were to read the Daily Prophet with a view to how the news was slanted for or against any particular event or decision from the Wizengamot. Unusually, the headmaster was in the Great Hall during lunch. Unfortunately, Malfoy had returned. On the other hoof, however, he was uncharacteristically quiet and kept his attention on his meal. The other students, except Crabbe and Goyle, kept their distance and ignored his presence as best as they could. Partway through lunch, the headmaster stood and tapped his goblet for the students' attention. As your househeads mentioned, I'm sure, for the next few weeks we have 5 visitors. He quickly named them, each standing briefly. They are evaluating the enchantments present in the castle to see what they can learn. Please do not intrude upon their study. The enchantments are complex and they should not be distracted. He smiled genially and sat back down. While Princess Twilight wasn't in evidence, it was clear the 5 were her doing. The hair color of 2 of them and their overall awkwardness towards eating made that evident to Harry and the Fillies. The headmaster was captivated by their conversations. Harry thought the new people had something to do with the strict warnings Professor McGonagall had given them yesterday. Dark artifacts are forbidden in Hogwarts, as they have been for the last 50 years, she had said yesterday evening, and as your student guidebook clearly states. She had paused, then said, any student who thinks he might have one or more such items is encouraged to hand it, or them, into either a househead or one of the 7th-year prefects. She had glanced over the crowd in the common room. If the item is not a ministry-proscribed artifact, it will be returned to your parents for safekeeping. Any student with such an artifact after dinner tomorrow will be docked points and assigned a detention. The artifact will be confiscated and destroyed, and the family fined. She had stopped and had given the gathered students a hard look. The length of the detention and the points lost will be determined by the danger of the artifact. The more dangerous the artifact or spell cast on it, the more severe the punishment. She had given them another hard look. Minimums are a week with Mr. Filch and 25 points. There had been quite a few puzzled looks among the students at that announcement. And a few worried ones, as well, Harry had noticed. When it became apparent that Professor McGonagall was through, except for a few questions from the senior students, the first years had just shrugged their shoulders and had gone to bed. After all, none of them had had any dark items. During the Quidditch practice session after classes that afternoon, Hermione and Percy, neither of whom were interested in playing the game at school, handed their Nimbus 2000s to Angelina and Alicia, the chasers. The reserves took turns handing over their new brooms to the new chaser, Katie Bell. Oliver stuck with his standard clean sweep broomstick. I don't need the pure speed offered by the newer broomstick. Agility is more important than raw speed for the position of keeper, he insisted. Ron nodded his agreement at this bit of information. At dinner, the headmaster appeared tired, again. Harry suspected it was because he had spent the day in the Chamber of Secrets, exploring it thoroughly. The other professors appeared unsettled by the 5 new professors seated at the table. Still, that Monday passed without a disaster was unexpected. It did generate a bit of controversy among the Gryffindors though, when Hermione insisted she didn't have time for being a pony because she wanted to study a new book, instead. They had all become quite proficient at bookwalking by then. There were far fewer ejections from the books as the students had slowly become used to the magical requirements for staying inside. The upper year students had the least difficulty, the first highs had the most. Usually, an hour at a time was the limit their magic gave the 6th and 7th years, and usually loss of concentration was at fault for the failures. Except Hermione, naturally. Her focus was phenomenal, to say the least. Keeping Hermione out of the books was now the problem. And that problem led to another rule being posted on Tuesday morning in the common room. 6. While the longing to learn is laudable, students are no longer allowed within a Hogwarts library book for longer than 2 hours. 5 points deducted for each infraction. A. Miss Granger is prohibited from remaining inside any of her own personal books for longer than 2 hours on penalty of her mother's very stern lecture. B. Miss Granger is not allowed to use the bookwalking spell past lights out. 5 points deduction for each infraction. C. Miss Granger is also no longer allowed into any Hogwarts library book without strict supervision by a professor, or a student 2 years her senior. The Weasley twins are not considered appropriate supervisors. Hermione was, of course, mortified that the new rule singled her out. Harry thought she was more upset at not being allowed to bookwalk after lights out, actually. Hermione gave an entire rant about the new rules on bookwalking while they walked downstairs to the Great Hall. She finally stopped as they sat down, and she grumpily propped up a book so she could eat while reading. Harry noticed that Apple Bloom was depressed. In fact, all 3 fillies were leading him to ask, "What's wrong?" "Ah, had a dream I'd never get my cutie mark again," she dismally explained. "Yeah," Scuttaloo said. "She woke us up, too," added Sweetie Belle. "We got to talking about cutie marks last night," Scuttaloo added. "You didn't help any when you told her all those bad marks she might get," Sweetie Belle said accusingly. Scuttaloo wriggled in place a moment. "I didn't mean nothing," she said defensively. "Hey, we're all friends. Just because you don't get or have a cutie mark isn't going to stop that," Harry said quietly. "Yeah," said Scuttaloo excitedly. "We're herdmates, there's no way we'd forget each other." Harry threw his arm over her shoulders and hugged her. Sweetie Belle on her other side did the same. "Besides," Harry added, "I'll never get a cutie mark." "Wizards never do, right Ginny?" Ginny nodded, her mouth full of food. She swallowed quickly. "My parents never mentioned it. And they'd know, I'm sure," she said, nodding. The fillies stared back her. "What about them tattoos I heard about?" Apple Bloom asked. Ginny shrugged as Hermione nodded absent-mindedly. "Entertainment? I don't really know. Although, I did hear Bill say some of the Cursebreakers wore tattoos as protection." "Besides," said Scuttaloo, "we still got that list of cutie mark possibilities." She nodded firmly. Apple Bloom just stared at her for a moment. Then she grinned. "Yeah, it's about time we started on those. Let's see the list." Sweetie Belle grinned back at her and fished a paper out of her rucksack while the others quickly loaded their plates with food. Harry sighed and resumed eating. The Gryffindor Frnds stared down the corridor, disappointed. They were blocked off from the room with Fluffy by an invisible barrier that kept them several yards from the door. Harry did not point out the broom closet he had been hiding in behind them. "Good thing that barrier wasn't there last time or Filch would have caught us for sure," said Sweetie Belle. Those who had been there that night nodded their agreement while the other Gryffindors just sighed. They were unsure of whether the barrier kept them safe or it kept them from seeing something as cool and neat as a Cerberus. Not surprisingly, the lines for that broke along gender, with disappointed wizards and relieved witches. "Well, now what?" asked Apple Bloom. "I guess that's a bust," said Dean, let down at not seeing Fluffy. "We should leave before Mr. Filch or his cat sees us and gets us into trouble," said Faye. Scuttaloo was staring, with an odd look on her face, at a nearby painting of a wizard in a drawing room, all dressed in black. The wizard was staring back with an aloof expression of disappointment. Harry was watching her carefully. He knew that look she had. Even without flexible ears and swishing tail, it meant trouble. Suddenly, she giggled, pointed her wand at the painting, and invoked Hayscart's method. "Hey!" came her voice from the painting, with her standing beside the wizard who was staring at her in disbelief. It worked. It took only moments before they were all in the painting. "Wow," said Sweetie Belle, looking around the wizard's sitting room. The rest spread out looking at the furnishing and walls around them. They could feel the paint strokes on the walls and furniture around them. And while the images were two-dimensional, they felt three-dimensional. And that meant they could sit on the couch, even though it looked like a cardboard cutout angled in the background. Several were bouncing and giggling on the couch. "I say, what do you think you are doing?" asked the outraged wizard, now pressed over to one side of the room, as the 14 children were now crowded into his formerly empty room. "You aren't supposed to be in here. Only paintings are allowed to roam the paintings." "Nonsense," said Hermione righteously, turning to face him. "There are no rules that say a student cannot enter a painting." "But no student has ever done so," declared the wizard. Scootaloo smirked. "Well, I won't tell if you won't." The wizard stared at her, perplexed and angry. "Oh look, the next painting," came the cry from Sweetie Belle as she darted through the open door hidden by the picture's frame. "Let's see, oh, yeah, and there's another here," came from several people as they spread out in both directions. "Stop that this instant," bellowed the wizard, "come back here." He pulled his wand, but, of course, could do nothing as he had no magical core. He frowned heavily as the group quickly spread to other paintings. "I shall have to go get the headmaster, if you don't all behave." "Hey, Harry," called Apple Bloom, "look at this meadow. Wow, this painting goes to the next floor. No more waiting for the stairs to move. I wonder if we can go straight to the dorms." "Petrificus totalis," came from another direction and the wizard slowly toppled over. "Sorry, sir," said Ginny, "but this is just too perfect for sneaking around without anyone noticing." She dragged him to a couch. "If you promise not to tell on us, I'll let you go." She placed him as best she could on the couch, then cast Finite Incantatem. He settled back on the couch, as if sitting, and stared at her in indignation. She kept her wand on him. "I must tell the headmaster you have been here. It's my job, and I cannot lie to the headmaster," he stated, staring at her wand. "If he asks has anyone been in the corridor, I am obligated to reply with the truth." She frowned back at him as Harry listened to the conversation. Did all the paintings report to the headmaster? It gave him an unparalleled system for watching out for mischievous students. Which meant he had to know the truth if there were any disputes in front of a painting. Harry had to wonder if the other students realized they were always being spied upon. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 29. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author tkepner on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.